My own brother held my Bronze Star medal in his hand and asked if it could buy him a Mustang. My mother nodded and said, "He's right, you know." In that moment, 20 years of service, of sacrifice, of honor turned to ash. They thought they were looking at a lonely, broken woman. They had no idea they were looking at a soldier preparing for her next war. And this time, the battlefield was our family. I am Colonel Maeve Collins. For the first time in a year, I was home from Syria, sitting across from my family. The air inside Chris's Steak and Seafood House in Fayetteville, North Carolina, was thick with the scent of grilled steak and a phoniness I could almost taste. It clung to the heavy red curtains and the dark wood paneling, a suffocating perfume of pretense. My mother, Eleanor Collins, a classic Southern woman whose self-worth was welded to her social standing, was holding court. Not with me, her daughter who had just spent 365 days coordinating intel in one of the most volatile regions on the planet. No, she was leaning toward the neighboring table, her voice a proud, honeyed drawl as she boasted about her son, my younger brother, First Lieutenant Caleb Collins. "My Caleb is just so brilliant," she declared, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "He just completed this incredibly advanced logistics course. Why, you'd think he was planning this strategy for the entire 82nd Airborne." I watched Caleb, 28, soak it in. He had completed a basic officer's course, a necessary but unremarkable step in any military career. Yet, under the warm glow of our mother's narrative, he was a budding General Patton. He just smirked, taking a long sip of his beer. My father, Richard, remained true to his lifelong role, the silent accomplice. He focused intently on his medium-rare steak, his knife and fork moving with a surgeon's precision. It was his signature move, a deliberate retreat into the mundane to avoid the gravitational pull of any potential conflict. His silence wasn't peace, it was an endorsement. No one asked about the sleepless nights in Damascus. No one asked about the weight of life or death decisions, about the faces of the young soldiers whose survival depended on the quality of my intelligence. I was a ghost at my own welcome home party, a faded photograph in the background, present only to provide a stark, colorless contrast against which my brother could shine. Still, a foolish, stubborn sliver of hope persisted. It was a traitorous little emotion I'd been trying to kill for decades. With that last flicker of hope, I reached into my bag and placed a dark blue, velvet-covered box on the white tablecloth. It landed with a soft, definitive thud that momentarily silenced my mother's performance. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, the Bronze Star medal gleamed under the restaurant's low golden light. The metallic sheen of the star, the rich crimson of the ribbon with its bold blue stripe. It represented courage, merit, and sacrifice. My sacrifice. "I was awarded this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, though a slight tremor betrayed me, "for successfully commanding the intelligence-gathering operation on my last tour." Caleb picked it up. He didn't hold it with reverence. He handled it like a cheap toy from a cereal box, flipping it over in his palm. His lips curled into that familiar, dismissive smirk. "Oh, neat," he scoffed. His eyes, so much like my mother's, flicked up to meet mine, devoid of warmth. "So does this thing buy you a Mustang? Or is it just a decoration for a lonely old maid in her temporary apartment at Fort Bragg?" My heart didn't just sink. It stopped. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Before I could form a single word, before I could assemble a defense for my own honor, my mother's voice sliced through the silence. It was sweet, melodic, and utterly merciless. "He's right, you know, Maeve," she said, patting Caleb's hand as if he'd just made a profound observation. Caleb is just being practical. Men need tangible things, honey. A nice car, a solid career path, something they can see and touch. The world narrowed to their two faces, a united front of casual cruelty. Just then, as the humiliation threatened to swallow me whole, a new voice cut through the air, deep and resonant with authority. Colonel Collins. I looked up to see Captain Marcus Thorne, Caleb's commanding officer, standing by our table. He was in his dress uniform, his posture ramrod straight. He didn't even glance at Caleb. His eyes were fixed on me, and in them I saw an undisguised, profound respect that felt like a lifeline in a drowning sea. "Congratulations on the medal, ma'am," he said, his voice clear and strong. "The entire base is talking about your work in Syria. It's an honor." He then allowed his gaze to shift, first to Caleb, then to our mother. His expression turned from respect to a cold professional disapproval. The temperature at our table dropped 10 degrees. "Lieutenant Collins," Captain Thorne said, his tone now clipped and official, "you should learn to show some respect for a superior officer and for the symbols of valor this country bestows." The atmosphere froze solid. My mother's practiced, smiling face went rigid. Caleb's smirk vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed, slack-jawed panic. For the first time in their lives, perhaps, their carefully constructed narrative had been publicly dismantled by an unimpeachable authority. After a curt nod to me, Captain Thorne turned and walked away. The silence he left in his wake was heavier and more oppressive than the noise before. My mother cleared her throat, a small, flustered sound, and tried to pivot. "So, Richard, did you hear about the new Greenway project?" But I wasn't listening anymore. I just watched them, these people whose faces had once constituted my entire world. And for the first time, I saw them with the dispassionate clarity of an intelligence analyst. Caleb's contempt wasn't youthful arrogance. My mother's endorsement wasn't thoughtless favoritism. It was a core belief system, a brutal truth made plain. In their eyes, all my sacrifices, my discipline, my achievements were worthless next to the material wants of my brother. The chill from the restaurant's air conditioning vent above seemed to seep directly into my bones, and it suddenly reminded me of another kind of cold, a deeper, more familiar cold that had been with me my entire life. That chill I felt in the restaurant, the one that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, it had a history. It wasn't a new sensation. It was a cold I recognized, a ghost that had followed me from the humid summers and crisp autumns of my North Carolina childhood. As I sat alone in my sterile, temporary apartment at Fort Bragg, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of every time I had been made to feel small, invisible, and inconsequential. The cold smelled of candle wax and pine boughs on Christmas Eve at the First Baptist Church. I was 15, and I had spent the entire week before the annual potluck perfecting my grandmother's secret pecan pie recipe. I'd followed her handwritten notes on the faded index card, the ones stained with butter and thyme, until the crust was perfectly flaky and the filling was a rich, gooey caramel. My pie, golden and glistening, sat proudly on the long fellowship hall table, among the green bean casseroles and honey-baked hams. I watched with a thumping heart as Pastor Adams took a bite, his eyes widening in delight. "My goodness, this is heavenly," he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Who is the master baker behind this masterpiece?" I felt a surge of pride and took a small step forward, ready to claim my moment. But before I could open my mouth, my mother's arm snaked around Caleb's shoulders. He was only 9, more interested in sneaking another sugar cookie than in my culinary triumph. "That would be my Caleb," she announced to the pastor, her smile radiating a false maternal pride. "He's so clever with his hands, you know, just like his father." Caleb, his mouth already full of my pie, just shrugged and gave a little grin. And just like that, I was erased. I stood there, a phantom in a red Christmas sweater. The joyful notes of "O Holy Night" from the choir practice room feeling like a mockery. The lump of hurt that formed in my throat was hard and real, and it tasted more bitter than the burnt coffee in the church percolator. That was the first time I understood that my achievements were not my own. They were a community resource to be allocated to my brother as my mother saw fit. The cold felt like the furious lashing rain of Hurricane Fran in 1996. The storm tore through North Carolina, a screaming fury of wind that ripped our ancient oak tree from the front yard, leaving a gaping wound in the earth. I was a freshman, a plebe, at West Point then, living on a meager cadet's stipend. I gathered every dollar I had saved, $500, and sent it home. It was a fortune to me, earned through spit-shined shoes and endless drills. My father, his voice filled with a rare warmth over the phone, promised to use a portion of it to have a commemorative brick laid in the rebuilt front walkway. "So everyone knows the Collins family has 2 children serving this country," he'd said, and my heart had swelled with a sense of belonging, of being part of a legacy. But when I came home on leave that spring, the marble paver set in the new concrete path had only a single line of gleaming gold script, "Caleb Collins." I stared at it, the absence of my own name a physical blow. My father saw my face and shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. "Well, Maeve," he stammered, polishing his glasses, "a son's name just sounds stronger, more permanent. The future of the family name rests with him, you see." He said it as if it were a simple, unavoidable fact of nature, like gravity or the rising sun. In his world, I was temporary. A daughter serves, a daughter leaves, a son endures. The storm outside had long since passed, but the one inside me was just beginning to gather strength. A tempest of resentment that would rage for years. Amidst those bleak, gray memories, there was one pinpoint of light, one warm place in the landscape of cold shoulders. My grandfather. He was a Marine, a veteran of the brutal fighting on Iwo Jima, and his eyes saw things other people missed. He was the only one who ever truly saw me. I remember one lazy summer afternoon, I was moping on the back porch, devastated because Caleb had accidentally dismantled the model volcano I'd built for my science fair project. Granddad came out and sat beside me on the wooden steps, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and his Old Spice aftershave. He didn't scold Caleb or offer empty platitudes. He just pointed a weathered finger toward the vast blue Carolina sky. "Look up there, Maeve," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Don't you ever let the small clouds block out your whole sky. You were forged from starlight, kid. Don't you ever forget it." His words became my anchor. In the lonely barracks at West Point, on desolate forward operating bases, during every moment I felt overlooked or dismissed by my family, I would hold on to that phrase, "forged from starlight." It was a secret identity, a source of strength only I knew about. But my grandfather was gone now, buried with full military honors years ago. And with him, it felt like that anchor had rusted away, leaving me adrift. And so I came back to the present, back to my apartment at Fort Bragg, the cold weight of the bronze star in my palm. My grandfather's words echoed in the silent room. You were forged from starlight. But for so many years I had allowed the clouds named Eleanor and Caleb to eclipse my own light. I had fought enemies of the state, planned campaigns, and led soldiers on foreign battlefields. Yet I had consistently, unconditionally surrendered on the home front. I accepted the terms of my own insignificance without a fight. Have you ever had that moment? The one where a lifetime of small cuts suddenly feels like a single mortal wound? That was my moment. The shame and anger from the restaurant didn't just sit on the surface. It dredged up every ghost, every slight, every erased accomplishment from the bottom of my soul. A question sharp as a bayonet twisted in my gut. Where was the warrior my grandfather saw in me? Where was the woman forged from starlight? What must I do to be worthy of that one single piece of faith, and to finally reclaim my own sky? That night, sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The questions from my past had finally ignited a fire in my present. The warrior my grandfather saw wasn't gone. She had just been dormant, waiting for a clear objective. Now she had one. I turned my living room into a tactical operations center. The large world map on my wall, dotted with pins from my deployments, came down. In its place, I mounted a large whiteboard. At the top, in clean black letters, I wrote the mission title, Operation Ledger. My military training kicked in, a familiar and comforting discipline. The objective was clear: to collect, analyze, and verify all intelligence related to the financial and propaganda activities of two primary subjects, Target Eleanor and Target Caleb. Phase 1 would be Open Source Intelligence, or OSINT. I booted up my laptop, logged into an anonymous VPN, and began my work. The skills I had honed to track terrorist cells and expose disinformation networks were now being aimed at my own family. There was no room for emotion. There was only the mission. My mother's Facebook profile was a goldmine of targeted misinformation. It was a masterclass in narrative control. Every post about Caleb was a carefully curated tribute, adorned with hashtags like "Stum Proud Army Mom," "Our Hero Son," and "Sug Future Leader." One photo showed him standing beside a battle tank, his arms crossed confidently. My mother's caption read, "My boy protecting our country." I knew for a fact that tank was a static display at the Airborne and Special Operations Museum, and the photo was taken on his day off. In contrast, the rare mentions of me were vague and tinged with pity. Praying for our daughter on her challenging path. I wasn't a hero, I was a burden to be prayed for. Then I found it, a GoFundMe page titled Caleb Collins Consulting. The goal was a staggering $50,000, and there, as the banner image, was a photograph of me shaking hands with a 4-star general at a promotion ceremony. My reputation, my years of service, were being used as collateral to lend credibility to his scam. The description was even more galling. It spoke of the family's heavy burden in supporting their less fortunate daughter, and implied that this new venture was a way for Caleb to help secure the family's future. He was painting himself as the savior, using my image as his shield. The next step was to follow the money. My security clearance simplified access to certain public and financial records. But the real key was the joint savings account I had been diligently contributing to for 20 years. I had always viewed it as a family safety net. I was wrong. It wasn't a safety net. It was Caleb's personal ATM. The data scrolled across my screen, cold, hard, and undeniable. A $5,000 withdrawal for emergency roof repairs in May was followed the very next day by a down payment to the University Ford dealership in Durham. The $20,000 combat pay bonus I'd received after a particularly grueling mission in Iraq had vanished, siphoned off in a series of cash withdrawals just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, dozens of small bites designed to go unnoticed, and then the final damning proof of his lifestyle. A public record search in Cumberland County cross-referenced with rental agreements led me to a lease contract. It was for a penthouse apartment in North Hills, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Raleigh, for we give out $100 a month. Caleb, the brother who was always just a little short on cash, the one who needed help with his car payment, was living a life of luxury funded entirely by my service and my sacrifice. The final piece of the puzzle lay in the family's cloud storage, an account my father had asked me to set up years ago because he was, in his words, not great with technology. I ran a keyword search, Maeve's money. The results loaded instantly, dozens of emails. My eyes landed on one sent from my mother to Caleb, dated 3 years prior. The subject line made my blood run cold. Regarding your sister's bonus. I clicked it open. The text was short and brutally efficient. Maeve just called. She's getting a big bonus. I told her the AC unit is on its last legs. Your sister will never check. She trusts us too much. Just use it to pay off your credit card debt. We have to make you look successful, honey. She trusts us too much. That was it, the linchpin, the confirmation of intent. This wasn't just recklessness. It was a calculated, long-term conspiracy built on the foundation of my trust. I began to print everything. Page after page spilled from my printer. The bank statements with fraudulent withdrawals highlighted in digital red, the time-stamped screenshots of the Facebook posts and the GoFundMe page, the rental agreement from North Hills, and finally the email. My fingers didn't tremble as I organized the documents. They were steady. I slid the stack of papers into a clear protector and began creating an encrypted file on a secure thumb drive. I needed evidence. And now I had an arsenal. After nights spent submerged in spreadsheets and bank statements, my mind was stretched taut like a wire about to snap. My small apartment smelled of stale coffee and the quiet, simmering rage of Operation Ledger. I was running on fumes, fueled by a cold fury that was beginning to exhaust me. Just as I felt myself about to drown in the sea of cold, hard data, my phone rang. The caller ID read, General James Miller, my mentor, the man who had guided me since I was a bewildered second lieutenant. His voice, when I answered, was a deep, warm baritone, a stark contrast to the brittle tension in my own home. Maeve, I heard you were back stateside, he said. Martha's making her famous fried chicken for Sunday dinner, and you're expected. That's an order, Colonel. For the first time in days, a genuine warmth pierced through the icy armor I'd built around my heart. It was a simple invitation, but it felt like a rescue. I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to be truly cared for. Driving to the Millers' home near Southern Pines on Sunday, I felt the knot in my shoulders begin to loosen. Their house was filled not with tension, but with laughter and the rich, comforting smells of a proper Southern meal. There were no veiled insults, no passive-aggressive silences. The moment I walked in, Martha, the general's wife, enveloped me in a hug that felt like coming home. She held on for an extra moment, as if she knew I needed it. Their children and grandchildren, many of whom were also serving in the military, greeted me with handshakes and genuine respect. They didn't see a lonely old maid. They saw a colonel. They asked about Syria, not with the gossipy curiosity of my mother's friends, but with the quiet understanding of fellow soldiers. Your work over there saved a lot of our people, Maeve. We read the reports, General Miller said, his voice resonating with a pride that my own father had never been able to muster. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, and the simple, affirming gesture almost brought me to tears. We sat around a large wooden table, passing platters of crispy fried chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and savory collard greens. The conversation was easy and light. They talked about football, about weekend plans, about funny stories from their own time in service. There was teasing, but it was affectionate. There were disagreements, but they were resolved with respect. This was a family, a unit, a place where service was honored, not commodified. Later, as the sun began to set, the general and I sat on the back porch, looking out over a meticulously cared-for garden of roses and hydrangeas. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. "Something's weighing on you, Maeve," he said quietly, not looking at me, but at the horizon. "You look like a soldier who's just come through a battle, but I don't think it was the one in Syria." My first instinct was to lie, to put on the stoic, unbreakable mask of Colonel Collins. "I'm fine, sir, just readjusting." But as I looked at his kind, knowing eyes, the walls I had so carefully constructed began to crumble. I couldn't bring myself to unload the sordid details of my family's betrayal onto this good man. So I gave him the only truth I could. "Sometimes, sir," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "the hardest battles are the ones fought on the home front." He didn't press. He simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. He placed his hand on my shoulder again. "Just remember, you're not alone in this fight, Maeve. You call me if you need reinforcements." Driving back to Fort Bragg, a sense of peace settled over me. The kindness of the Miller family was a balm on a raw wound, a temporary anesthetic. But as I pulled into my parking spot, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat, shattering the calm. The screen glowed with a single dreaded word: Mom. I took a deep, fortifying breath before answering, bracing myself for impact. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone I had learned to associate with an incoming request. "Maeve, darling," she began, "I have a little favor to ask. You know your brother has such a wonderful mind for business, but he just needs a little capital to get started. I've set up that GoFundMe page, and I was wondering, could you share it with some of your high-ranking friends? Just one click from you could change Caleb's entire future." The warmth from my evening with the Millers evaporated the moment my mother's voice, dripping with saccharine sweetness, came through the phone. It was a calculated, coordinated offensive, a multi-pronged attack on my resolve. Her call was just the opening salvo. I gripped my phone, the cool plastic a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I was channeling every ounce of my military discipline to keep it level. Using my rank and military connections for personal gain is a direct violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's unethical. A laugh, high-pitched and dismissive, erupted from the other end of the line. It was the laugh of someone who sees rules as mere suggestions. "Oh, Maeve, don't be so rigid. This is for family. It's not a big deal, just a few introductions. Imagine if you mentioned Caleb's project to General Miller. He'd help in a heartbeat. You're a colonel, for heaven's sake. It's time you used that power for something useful." A wave of bitter nausea washed over me. The something useful she meant was her son's fraudulent scheme. They didn't just want my money anymore. They wanted my soul. They wanted me to wager my entire career, my spotless record, my very honor on a lie. She wasn't just asking for a favor. She was asking me to become her accomplice. 2 days later, the next wave of the assault arrived at my doorstep. Caleb appeared, looking like a lost puppy. The usual arrogance was gone, meticulously replaced by a crafted look of pathetic dejection. His shoulders were slumped, his expression forlorn. "Maeve," he began, his voice soft and wounded, "I know you're mad at me, but I'm really trying here. I have this great business plan, but nobody will give me a chance." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. "Mom's right. A word from you could change everything. You're the only one who can help me. Do you really want to see your own brother fail?" He was using the puppy dog eyes, a technique he had perfected since childhood. But this time, the performance was transparent. I didn't see a misunderstood young man. I saw right through the cheap theatrics. I saw a lazy grifter attempting to leverage my life's work to create his own easy, unearned path. I saw the rot at his core. That evening, the final prong of the attack was deployed over the phone. My father called. His voice was heavy with a manufactured weariness and a palpable layer of reproach. "Maeve, your mother has been crying all day," he said, his tone dripping with disappointment. "Do you have any idea how much you're hurting her? Caleb is your brother. Family is supposed to help family." He sighed, a long, dramatic sound. "I've worked hard my whole life, but I don't have the connections you do. You have a chance to lift this entire family up. Why are you being so selfish?" And there it was. For the first time, his silence had transformed into a weaponized accusation. The man who had never once defended me, who had stood by silently while my accomplishments were ignored, was now actively guilt-tripping me into participating in their fraud. His silence had never been neutral. It had just been waiting for the right moment to serve their agenda. The breaking point came that weekend. It was Fayetteville's annual Heroes Homecoming Week, a citywide celebration of veterans and active duty soldiers. The downtown area was filled with families, flags, and a genuine sense of community pride. It was a sacred space for people like me, but my mother saw it as a stage. She spotted a group of local business owners near the main stage, men my father knew from the Rotary Club. Grabbing my arm with a grip like steel, she dragged me over, my uniform feeling less like a symbol of pride and more like a costume in her play. "Gentlemen," she announced, her smile bright and wide, "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Colonel Maeve Collins." She paused for effect, letting them take in my rank. Then, before I could even say hello, she pivoted seamlessly. And she is so proud, just completely supportive of her brother Caleb's new business venture. With a theatrical flourish, she produced a stack of business cards from her purse, Caleb Collins Consulting, and began handing them out with the practiced grace of a seasoned saleswoman. I stood there, frozen, a prop, a silent uniformed mannequin, being used as a living endorsement for their lie. I was paraded in front of the very community I had sworn to serve, my integrity being bartered away. In the shadow of a banner that read, "Thank you for your service," I was being used as a tool to deceive. The blood in my veins turned to fire. The casual cruelty at the steakhouse was a private wound. This was a public execution of my character. The carefully maintained dam of my composure, built over a lifetime of swallowing insults, finally, irrevocably, broke. Silence was no longer a strategy. Silence was complicity. General Miller's words echoed in my mind. "You're not alone in this fight." He was right, but he couldn't fight it for me. I had to be my own reinforcement. A cold, hard clarity settled over me, cutting through the noise and the humiliation. What is the truth? I asked myself, the question a silent vow in the noisy square. And who gets to tell it? I looked from my mother's triumphant smile to the cheap, glossy business card in a stranger's hand. And I knew the answer: me. After the humiliating spectacle at the hero's homecoming event, a cold dread settled in my gut. I knew there was one last dreadful suspicion I had to verify. There was a loose thread from my financial review, a $2,000 transfer I'd made months ago, that didn't add up. With a deep breath, I dialed my Aunt Carol in Asheville, my mother's younger sister. After a few minutes of pleasantries about her garden and the weather, I steered the conversation carefully, my voice a mask of casual concern. "Aunt Carol," I asked, "how have your eyes been? Did the cataract surgery a few months back go well?" A confused silence met me from the other end of the line. It stretched for a few seconds, thick with misunderstanding. "Surgery, honey. What surgery?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine puzzlement. "Your mother, Eleanor, told me you were having some financial troubles, so you couldn't send the money just yet. She even told me not to bother you about it, said you had enough on your plate. Poor thing, I felt so bad for you." My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. My breath caught in my chest, a sharp, painful gasp. The $2,000 I had sent, the money I'd earmarked specifically from my hazardous duty, pay for her surgery, had never arrived. They had intercepted it. They had stolen from their own family. But that wasn't the final blow. The final blow came next, wrapped in a blanket of misplaced gratitude, and it was the one that knocked the air from my lungs. "But thank goodness for that sweet boy Caleb," she continued, her voice brimming with affection. "He is just the kindest soul. When I told him I couldn't afford the initial consultation, he loaned me $500 right then and there. He said once his new company takes off, he'll cover the whole procedure for me." I had to grab the edge of my kitchen counter to keep myself from collapsing. The room tilted. The sheer calculated depravity of it was breathtaking. They didn't just steal my money, they had stolen it, then constructed an elaborate lie about my financial failure to cover their tracks. Then they had used a fraction of my own money to rebrand Caleb as a benevolent, self-made savior. They had weaponized my compassion to defraud their own family, an elderly woman in need of medical care. This wasn't the behavior of a dysfunctional family. This was the behavior of vultures, circling and picking clean the bones of anyone they perceived as weak or trusting. That night, I sat in the dark. The only light in the room came from my laptop screen, which glowed with the mountain of evidence I had compiled. There were no tears. The rage that had been simmering for weeks had finally boiled over, scorching away every last trace of sadness. It was a clean, pure, righteous fury. I had dedicated my entire adult life to defending this country from foreign enemies. But I now understood that the most dangerous enemy I had ever faced shared my last name. They lived in the house where I grew up, surrounded by the ghosts of my childhood memories. My grandmother used to read to me from the Bible, and a verse she loved came to mind, Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." But sitting there in the dark, I reinterpreted it through the lens of a soldier, a strategist. God's plan wasn't for me to silently endure harm. His plan was to give me the intellect, the training, and the strength to defend myself from it. Hope wasn't a passive wish. It was an active strategy. The future wasn't something you waited for. It was a territory you had to fight for and claim. "No more," I whispered into the darkness. the words a solemn vow that sealed the death of the person I used to be. The game ends now. Have you ever been pushed so far that the only path forward is to fight back with everything you have? I woke the next morning before the sun rose over the horizon. There was no more hesitation, no more gut-wrenching conflict. There was only the cold, sharp clarity of a mission that had to be executed. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. My movements were precise, economical, just as they would be if I were planning an intelligence campaign deep in hostile territory. I began to outline the phases of engagement, my handwriting a steady, determined script. Phase 1. Consolidate and systemize all evidence into an undeniable dossier. Every bank statement, every email, every screenshot, a fortress of facts. Phase 2. Neutralize primary threats. This meant anticipating and dismantling my mother's emotional manipulation and Caleb's arrogant denials before they could even be deployed. Phase 3. Establish the terms of surrender. This would not be a negotiation, it would be a list of non-negotiable demands. This was no longer a family squabble to be resolved over Sunday dinner. This was a war, and I would use every weapon in my arsenal to win it. The next morning, I drove to the FedEx office on Skibo Road. The sun was just a pale disk in the hazy Carolina sky, promising a heat that hadn't yet arrived. I walked through the automatic doors, no longer a wounded daughter seeking sympathy. I was an intelligence officer compiling a case file, and this sterile, brightly lit copy shop was my armory. From an encrypted USB drive, a device that held the digital ghosts of their betrayal, I began to print. Page after page slid into the tray with a soft whir, each one a testament to their long and meticulous campaign of deceit. The bank statements with dozens of fraudulent withdrawals highlighted in a stark, accusatory red. The time-stamped screenshots of my mother's saccharine Facebook propaganda and Caleb's phony, self-aggrandizing GoFundMe page. The damning chain of emails between my mother and my brother, their conspiracy laid bare in cold black text. The penthouse apartment lease from Raleigh, a monument to their audacity, 127 pages in total. Each page had once been a knife in my back, a fresh, stinging wound of betrayal. But as I watched them pile up, a tangible stack of their lies, I felt a fundamental shift. They were no longer wounds, they were ammunition. Each printed sheet was another round being loaded into the magazine of my resolve, ready to be fired. I took the warm stack of papers to a large work table in the corner. The crisp, percussive snap of the 3-hole punch was a satisfying mechanical sound, a counterpoint to the emotional chaos of the past few days. I arranged the documents chronologically, methodically, into a heavy-duty black binder. The process was strangely familiar, a muscle memory from my professional life kicking in, calming my nerves with its logical flow. It was exactly how I would prepare a mission briefing for the Pentagon. Every detail triple-checked, every potential question anticipated, every piece of evidence cross-referenced and tabbed for quick access. Back in my apartment, I opened the Excel spreadsheet for the final time. My finger hovered over the mouse. I clicked the box for the grand total. The number that appeared on the screen, stark against the white background, still managed to stun me for a brief second, even though I already knew what it would be. 87,450 hours. The figure had a weight, a gravity that transcended mere currency. It was the price of my trust, the cost of my naivete. And it had a legal name, one that echoed with harsh reality, grand larceny, a felony. Using a label maker, I printed a clean, professional title for the spine of the black binder. Collins Family Financial Review, 2018-2025. The binder felt heavy in my hands, heavy with paper, but heavier still with the undeniable, irrefutable weight of the truth. I taped another clean sheet of paper to my whiteboard, the one that still held the ghost of my mission outline. The new title, written in bold block letters, Rules of Engagement. I knew I couldn't confront them on their terms. An emotional battlefield was my mother's home turf, and on it she was a master tactician, skilled in the arts of guilt, tears, and redirection. I needed a different field of battle, one governed by logic, evidence, and consequences. I outlined my objectives with the precision of a mission planner. 1. Verbal acknowledgement from them for each specific fraudulent act. No blanket apologies. 2. A legally binding repayment plan drafted by a lawyer. 3. Public and private restitution, starting with a full, honest apology to Aunt Carol. 4. Professional consequences for Caleb to be handled by his command. I remembered a quote from General George S. Patton, a man who understood conflict. Prepare for the unknown by studying how others in the past have coped with the unforeseeable and the unpredictable. I applied it to this. I gamed out their reactions, their every likely move. My mother's theatrical tears, Caleb's explosive, self-righteous anger. My father's guilty, deafening silence. For each predictable tactic, I had a countermove prepared. I would not be ambushed. I would not be outmaneuvered. The final step in my preparation phase was to secure a witness, an objective observer. This could not devolve into a he said, she said family drama, where truth is drowned in a sea of emotion. I needed an impartial representative of order and regulation. I picked up the phone and dialed Captain Marcus Thorne. My voice was all business, stripped of any personal emotion. It was the voice of a superior officer addressing a subordinate, a tone that left no room for negotiation. Captain Thorne, this is Colonel Collins, I began. I'm convening a formal family meeting tomorrow evening to address some serious discrepancies regarding the conduct and financial declarations of Lieutenant Collins. I let the formality of the words hang in the air for a moment, letting their significance sink in. I would like to request your presence as an impartial observer. Your role would be strictly to clarify any questions regarding the Uniform Code of Military Justice should the need arise. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him processing the gravity of the request. A colonel was asking a captain to sit in on a family meeting about his subordinate. It was an extraordinary demand, and it signaled that this was far beyond a simple domestic dispute. Then his voice came back, firm and resolute. I'll be there, Colonel. The next evening I summoned them to my father's living room. I had insisted on their home turf. I wanted them to feel the foundations of their own kingdom shake. I had rearranged the space myself. The cozy coffee table was pushed against the wall, and in its place, 4 hard-backed dining chairs faced each other in the center of the room, a sterile and confrontational arrangement, like a scene from an interrogation room. There was no television on, no snacks laid out, no pretense of hospitality. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds to detonation. They trickled in, uneasy. My mother, Eleanor, surveyed the scene with a frown, her arms crossed defensively. "Well, what on earth is all this, Maeve? Why so serious?" she asked, her voice tight with annoyance. Caleb, ever the performer of nonchalance, slouched into a chair and immediately buried his face in his phone, projecting an aura of profound boredom. My father, Richard, avoided looking at anyone, his gaze fixed on a single invisible mark, on a coaster on the end table. They arrived expecting a lecture, perhaps another emotional outburst they could dismiss. They had no idea they were walking into a briefing, a court-martial, and they were the targets. I let the tense silence stretch for a full minute before I spoke. Then I placed the heavy black binder on the floor beside my chair and stood. We are here tonight to audit a series of irregular financial activities that have occurred over the last 7 years, I began. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion, the same tone I would use to brief a commanding general. I looked at each of them in turn. The total sum of the discrepancy is $87,450. My mother's jaw tightened. Caleb didn't even look up from his phone. I picked up the binder and opened it to the first tab. Item 1, I stated clearly. A $5,000 withdrawal from the joint savings account on May 12, 2022, designated for emergency roof repairs. This sum was wire transferred the following day to the University Ford dealership in Durham as a down payment on a 2022 Mustang GT. The vehicle is registered in the name of Caleb Collins. I looked at Caleb. His thumbs froze over his phone screen. The color began to drain from his face. I turned the page with a crisp snap. Item 2, a series of 24 cash withdrawals, totaling $20,000, made between June and October of 2019, following a combat pay bonus deposit. These funds were used for, among other things, a trip to Miami, season tickets to the Panthers games, and... I paused, letting the next words land. A penthouse apartment in Raleigh's North Hills district. For each charge, I slid the corresponding document out of the binder: the bank statement, the vehicle registration, the social media post of Caleb posing in front of his new car with the caption, "Hard work pays off." Each piece of paper was a nail in the coffin of their lies. "Are you insane?" Caleb finally exploded, leaping to his feet. The mask of boredom shattered, revealing the panicked rage beneath. "You're making all of this up. You're just jealous." My mother's performance began on cue. Her eyes welled up with practiced tears, her lower lip trembling. "Maeve, how could you? How could you treat your own brother this way, after everything we've done for you?" Her words were cut short by the sharp, sudden chime of the doorbell. The sound hung in the air, an unexpected interruption to their script. "Dad, get the door," I said, my voice unchanged. My father, looking startled, moved awkwardly to the door and opened it. Standing on the threshold, silhouetted against the evening light, was Captain Marcus Thorne. He was in his immaculate Class A uniform, his cap held respectfully in his hand. The contrast between his crisp official presence and the casual disarray of my family was jarring. He nodded once, a gesture of formal respect to me, then stepped inside and stood at parade rest in the corner of the room, a silent, authoritative statue. Caleb froze mid-rant. He stared at his commanding officer, his face turning a pasty, bloodless white. All the bluster, all the indignation died in his throat. He sank back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. The living room was no longer a living room. With Captain Thorne's presence, it had become a courtroom. I let the silence settle again, heavy and absolute, before turning to the final section of my binder. My voice was low, but it cut through the room like a razor. "Final item," I said, my eyes locking onto my mother's. Her tears had miraculously dried up. $2,000 transferred to my Aunt Carol for her cataract surgery. I looked at my father, who flinched as if struck. This money never arrived. Instead, Aunt Carol was informed by you, Mother, that I was experiencing financial trouble, and then Caleb, in a stunning act of generosity, loaned her $500 of my own money. I saw my father physically recoil, shrinking into his chair. That, I knew, was his breaking point, the line he knew they should never have crossed. I closed the binder with a soft, final thud. Then I turned my body slightly to address the uniformed officer in the corner. "Captain Thorne," I said, my voice clear and formal. "Under Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, would the act of defrauding a relative, specifically an elderly one, and leveraging a fictitious business funded by illicitly obtained money be considered a violation?" The question hung in the charged air of the silent room, not needing an answer. It was a verdict in itself, a self-detonating bomb I had just armed and placed in the center of their world, and all we could do was wait for the explosion. My question about the UCMJ hung in the room, a poison gas that choked off all sound. Captain Thorne didn't need to answer. The code he lived by was absolute, and its judgment was clear. The silence that followed was the sound of a dynasty crumbling. Caleb, the golden boy, collapsed into his chair. He buried his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, desperate sobs. All the arrogance, all the swagger, had been stripped away, leaving only a terrified young man facing the ruin of his own making. My father, Richard, seemed to age a decade in 10 seconds. He stared at the floorboards as if they held the secrets of the universe, his face a mask of profound, hollowed-out shame. He was a man witnessing the consequences of a lifetime of passive complicity. But my mother, Eleanor, was different. When her primary weapon, tears, proved ineffective against my fortress of facts, the faucet shut off instantly. The mask of the heartbroken matriarch fell away, and behind it was something hard, cold, and venomous. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure, undiluted rage. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "After everything we've done for you, after all the sacrifices we made, you humiliate your family like this, in front of a stranger?" I didn't respond. I simply watched her. Her reaction was the final piece of evidence I needed. There was no remorse for her actions, only fury at being caught. She wasn't sorry for the crime, only for the verdict. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, the adrenaline from the confrontation finally receding, leaving a deep, aching weariness in its place. I reached down and picked up the black binder from the floor, closing it with a soft, final click. "This is what happens now," I said, my voice cold and clear, each word a carefully placed stone in the new wall I was building between us. "First, a promissory note for the full $87,450 will be drafted by my lawyer. It will be sent here tomorrow. You both will sign it." I looked from my mother's furious face to my father's defeated one. "Second, you," I said, my gaze locking onto my mother, "will call Aunt Carol. You will apologize, and you will wire her $2,000 plus interest from your own account today." Third, I turned to the sobbing mess that was my brother. "Caleb, you will shut down the GoFundMe page and delete every false claim about your sham consulting firm from the internet. As for your military career," I paused, letting him look up, "you can address that with Captain Thorne." I surveyed the wreckage of my family. This is not a negotiation, these are the terms. My mother opened her mouth to spit more venom, but I held up a single hand, a gesture that stopped her cold. "Don't," I said, the word a quiet command. "From this moment forward, All communication between us will be conducted via email and will pertain only to the repayment schedule. There will be no phone calls, no text messages, no surprise visits. I took a breath, preparing to deliver the final, killing blow to the relationship that had defined and damaged me for so long. I am no longer your daughter. I am your creditor. I thought of the researcher Brené Brown, whose work had helped me understand the geography of my own pain. I remembered one of her core tenets: clear is kind, unclear is unkind. This brutal, absolute clarity was the kindest thing I could do for myself. It was an act of radical self-preservation. My father finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes was a universe of pain and a dawning, tragic acceptance. He understood. Too late, but he understood. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. I turned and walked toward the front door. At some point during the fallout, Captain Thorne had discreetly let himself out, leaving us to the privacy of our own demolition. I did not look back. I would not allow myself to be drawn into the gravitational pull of their chaos one last time. As I opened the front door, I heard it, a single choked sob from my father. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. A small, traitorous part of me wanted to turn around, to offer a word of comfort, but I didn't. I stepped out into the cool, damp Fayetteville night air, and when the front door clicked shut behind me, the sound wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The battle was over. The long, bloody war for my own soul had just been won. 6 months passed. My only contact with my family was a sterile, automated email notification once a month confirming that the payment from my parents' account had been transferred, as per the legal agreement. It was the cold, quiet hum of justice being served. I heard through a brief, professional correspondence with Captain Thorne that Caleb had been officially reprimanded. His once promising career path was now a dead end. He had been quietly transferred to a logistics unit in Texas, a place where his reputation wouldn't follow, but where his ambitions would surely wither and die. My mother never called. My father never wrote. The house in Fayetteville where I grew up was no longer a home, but merely an address on a legal document. The silence between us was no longer the suffocating weight of unspoken truths. It was the clean, crisp air of a respected boundary. And in that quiet space, for the first time in my life, I could finally hear my own voice clearly. One Saturday, I drove the winding roads up into the Blue Ridge Mountains to Asheville. I didn't call ahead. When Aunt Carol opened the door, her surprise quickly melted into a joyful hug. Her eyes, now clear and bright after a successful surgery paid for by her own sister's apology check, sparkled. I didn't tell her the whole sordid story. There was no need to tarnish her with the details of their betrayal. I simply said there had been a misunderstanding and that I wanted to make sure she was well taken care of. I handed her a check. It wasn't for the $2,000 they had stolen. It was for $5,000. "This is for you to take a trip," I told her, "or fix up the garden or do whatever you want. No strings attached." When she hugged me, tears of gratitude in her bright eyes, I felt like I was settling a debt far greater than money. I was repaying a debt to my own kindness, which had been so cruelly weaponized against me. I was reclaiming it and giving it away freely. Back in Fayetteville, I started to build a new legacy. I began volunteering my time at a local outreach center for homeless veterans. I never wore my uniform. I never used my rank. I was just Maeve. I helped men and women whose shoulders were stooped with the weight of forgotten wars and a society that had cast them aside to write resumes. I guided them through the labyrinth of VA benefits. Most importantly, I just listened. I listened to their stories, and in their narratives of pain and resilience, I saw echoes of my own. So many of them also bore scars, not from combat, but from family, from betrayal, from being made to feel invisible after their service was no longer needed. In helping them piece their lives back together, I was also healing myself. I realized the skills the Army had taught me, strategy, logistics, analysis, were not just for fighting enemies. They could be used to rebuild lives, my own included. One morning, long before my alarm was set to go off, I found myself driving east toward the coast. I ended up at Wrightsville Beach, kicking off my shoes and walking onto the cool, damp sand. I sat and watched the sun begin its slow ascent over the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, painting the sky in strokes of orange, pink, and gold. The black binder, my arsenal of truth, still sat in a locked file cabinet in my apartment, but its weight was gone. It was no longer an instrument of war, but simply a historical document, a reminder of a battle I had fought and won. My grandfather's voice, a warm and gravelly echo from a long-ago summer afternoon, whispered in my mind, "You were forged from starlight, kid." And as I watched the new day being born on the horizon, for the first time with every fiber of my being, I believed him. My sky was clear now, vast and blue and endless. There were no clouds. I was no longer a rejected daughter. I am Colonel Maeve Collins, a soldier, a survivor, and finally a free woman. My life was just beginning. My story has found its peace, but I know that for many of you listening, your own battles might still be ongoing. You might be facing your own version of a stolen pecan pie, a broken promise, or a moment of public humiliation. Please know this: you are not invisible. Your strength, your sacrifices, and your worth are real, even if the people closest to you refuse to see it. You too were forged from starlight. If my story resonated with you, please share your own thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and finding your own voice.